The serving spoon was halfway to the tray when the first mortar round hit. Staff Sergeant Noelle Simmons had been ladling mashed potatoes onto a young private's plate, wearing the standard mess hall apron over her uniform, her seal, trident, barely visible beneath the fabric. The explosion shook the compound, sent the food trays clattering, and transformed what had been a routine Tuesday lunch service into the moment when everyone discovered that the quiet woman who'd been serving them meals for the past 2 weeks wasn't actually assigned to food services. The mortar impact killed the lights, triggered alarms, and sent 200 soldiers diving for cover in a mess hall that had suddenly become a kill zone. Simmons didn't dive for cover. She dropped the serving spoon, tore off the apron, and her hand went to the HK-416 assault rifle she'd kept hidden beneath the serving counter, because Navy SEALs on classified assignments don't stop being operators just because they're temporarily disguised as mess hall staff. What the enemy insurgents attacking the compound didn't know, what most of the base personnel were about to discover, was that the woman who'd been cheerfully serving them breakfast, lunch, and dinner was actually one of JSOC's most lethal close-quarters combat specialists, and she'd been conducting counterintelligence surveillance while pretending to scoop eggs and pour coffee. The SEAL trident on her chest caught the emergency lighting as she brought her HK-416 to ready position, and suddenly, every soldier in that mess hall understood that their lunch service was about to become a masterclass in how Navy SEALs respond when someone attacks their position. The enemy had made a catastrophic tactical error. They'd hit a compound thinking they were attacking a standard logistics base with minimal security. They were about to learn that minimal security is what it looks like when a SEAL operator is disguised as kitchen staff, and that attacking during lunch meant they'd just put themselves between Noelle Simmons and the exit, which was the last mistake many of them would ever make. The assignment had started 3 weeks earlier with a classified briefing that would have seemed absurd to anyone outside Special Operations. Naval Special Warfare Command had intelligence suggesting an insider threat at Forward Operating Base Viper. Someone was feeding operational information to insurgent networks, and conventional security measures had failed to identify the leak. Commander Sarah Chen had laid out the mission parameters with the kind of calm that came from years of planning impossible operations. We need someone who can observe the entire base population, who has legitimate access to common areas, who can interact with everyone from privates to colonels without raising suspicion. Simmons had studied the compound layout, the personnel roster, the patterns of information compromise. Mess hall staff. They see everyone multiple times per day in relaxed environments when people talk freely. Exactly. Can you cook? I can heat MRES and pour coffee. That's probably enough for military food service. Chen had smiled. You'll need to do better than that. 2-week crash course in military food preparation, then insertion as temporary staff augmentation. Your cover is that you're filling in while regular staff are on rotation leave. You maintain the assignment until you identify the leak or determine the intelligence was wrong. So Staff Sergeant Noelle Simmons, veteran of 6 combat deployments, 73 confirmed eliminations of high-value targets, expert in close-quarters battle and tactical assault, had spent 2 weeks learning how to operate industrial food equipment, memorizing recipes for preparing meals for 200 personnel, and practicing the kind of cheerful small talk that mess hall workers used while serving food. The insertion had been perfect. She'd arrived with legitimate orders, proper credentials, and a backstory that held up to casual scrutiny. For 3 weeks she'd served breakfast at 600, lunch at 1200, and dinner at 1800. She'd listened to soldiers complain about their officers, officers complain about mission parameters, and everyone complain about the food she was serving. She'd also identified patterns. Certain personnel asking specific questions, information being discussed that shouldn't have been common knowledge, a staff sergeant in supply who seemed too interested in convoy schedules, a translator who was present for too many classified briefings. She'd been 72 hours from completing her assessment and preparing her report when the mortars started falling. The first round had hit the compound's eastern perimeter, a ranging shot designed to establish targeting data. The second round hit closer, impacting near the motor pool. Simmons had recognized the pattern immediately. Systematic targeting, walking rounds toward the compound center. The third round hit the mess hall's eastern wall. The explosion was massive, close enough to blow out windows, send shrapnel through the dining area, and wound at least a dozen soldiers who'd been eating near that wall. The lights died, emergency systems activated, and chaos erupted as 200 personnel tried to process what was happening. Simmons processed it in 3 seconds. Mortar attack. Probably diversionary. Ground assault would follow. The mess hall was about to become either a defensive position or a massacre site, depending on how the next 60 seconds played out. She grabbed her HK-416 from beneath the serving counter, the weapon she'd kept hidden there for exactly this scenario, field-stripped and wrapped in plastic to avoid questions about why mess hall equipment included a SEAL team assault rifle. Her hands moved through the reassembly with muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions, magazine inserted, charging handle racked, selector switch checked, optics verified, 4 seconds to combat ready. The private she'd been serving, a young kid from Idaho who'd thanked her for extra potatoes, was on the ground bleeding from shrapnel wounds. Simmons grabbed him, dragged him behind the serving counter where the stainless steel equipment provided some protection. "Stay down. Press this against the wound. You're going to be fine." She moved through the mess hall with purpose, her presence cutting through the panic. Everyone on the floor, away from the windows, wounded to the center, able-bodied personnel establish perimeter positions. A captain, someone she'd served lunch to every day for 3 weeks, stared at her in confusion. "Who the hell are you to give orders?" Simmons's hand went to her chest, ripped open her uniform top, revealed the SEAL trident she'd kept hidden beneath the mess hall apron. "Staff Sergeant Simmons, Naval Special Warfare. I'm the ranking Special Operations asset on this base, and right now I'm assuming tactical command of this position. Get your people organized or get out of my way." The captain's confusion shifted to comprehension, then immediate compliance. "You heard her. Wounded to the center, everyone else find cover and prepare to defend this position." More mortar rounds were falling now, systematic bombardment designed to soften the compound before ground assault. Simmons moved to the mess hall's western wall, scanned the perimeter through a broken window. Movement, 300 meters out, at least 40 fighters moving in coordinated assault formation. Too organized, too well equipped. Not random insurgents, this was a planned operation with specific objectives. She keyed the radio she'd retrieved from her hidden equipment. Viper Base, this is Shadow 7. Compound under coordinated mortar and ground assault. Estimate 40 hostiles approaching from western perimeter, requesting immediate QRF and air support. The response came back through static. Shadow 7, Viper Base. QRF is 20 mics out, air support 30 mics. Can you hold that long? Simmons assessed her tactical situation. 200 personnel in the mess hall, mostly support staff with limited combat training, maybe 30 with proper weapons, unknown number of wounded, against 40 trained fighters with crew-served weapons and indirect fire support. Viper Base, we'll hold. Shadow 7 out. She turned to face the mess hall full of soldiers who were looking at her with a mixture of confusion, fear, and dawning realization. These people had been serving food beside her for 3 weeks. Now they were about to see what she actually did for a living. "Listen up. I'm a Navy SEAL conducting classified operations on this base. The enemy is about to assault this compound with overwhelming force. We've got 20 minutes until reinforcements arrive, which means we need to hold this position for 20 minutes. Here's how we're going to do that." She pointed to a staff sergeant she recognized from the motor pool. "You. Take 10 people with rifles, establish firing positions on the western wall. Don't engage until I give the word. Make every shot count." She pointed to the captain. "You, get the wounded organized. Establish triage in the kitchen where there's more cover. Anyone who can't fight helps with medical." She pointed to a corporal from communications. "You, find me every weapon in this building. Rifles, pistols, kitchen knives if that's all we've got. Distribute them to anyone who knows how to use them." She watched her orders being executed, saw the chaos organizing into purposeful action. These weren't elite operators, but they were soldiers, and soldiers could fight if someone gave them direction and confidence. The enemy was 200 meters out now. Simmons could see them clearly through her HK-416's optics. organized into 3 assault elements, supporting each other's movement, using cover effectively. Professional fighters who knew what they were doing. She selected her first target, a fighter who appeared to be directing others, carrying a radio, positioned to coordinate the assault. 700 meters per second muzzle velocity, 150 meter range, minimal wind, no adjustment needed. She fired. The fighter dropped. His radio went silent mid-transmission. The effect on the enemy formation was immediate. Confusion, hesitation, fighters seeking cover as they realized someone was engaging them with precision fire. Simmons shifted targets. Second fighter trying to set up a machine gun. Double tap, center mass. The machine gun fell silent before it could fire a single round. Third fighter attempting to rally others, headshot. The rally attempt collapsed. Western wall, engage targets of opportunity, make them keep their heads down. Rifle fire erupted from the mess hall's western positions. Not the precision shooting Simmons was delivering, but volume of fire that made the enemy think twice about advancing. The attackers went to ground, began returning fire, and the battle transformed from an assault into a firefight, which gave Simmons exactly what she needed: time. She moved through the mess hall, directing fire, repositioning defenders, ensuring wounded were being treated. Her HK-416 spoke with controlled bursts whenever targets presented themselves. A fighter exposing himself to advance, another trying to flank, a third attempting to employ a rocket-propelled grenade. The enemy was discovering that attacking a logistics base was different when that base included a SEAL operator who'd been preparing for exactly this scenario since the day she'd arrived, disguised as kitchen staff. A massive explosion rocked the northern wall, RPG impact that blew a hole through the structure and sent defenders scrambling. Enemy fighters immediately tried to exploit the breach, rushing toward the opening. Simmons was already moving. She reached the breach in 6 seconds, positioned herself to cover the opening, and opened fire as the first fighter tried to enter. The HK-416 was a masterpiece of German engineering. Reliable, accurate, devastating in trained hands. Simmons's hands were very trained. The first fighter dropped. The second fell trying to enter. The third died before he could cross the threshold. "I need 3 rifles on this breach, now!" Soldiers responded, establishing a firing position that turned the hole in the wall into a kill zone rather than an entry point. The enemy's attempted exploitation failed, cost them 5 fighters, and made them reconsider their assault plan. But they weren't giving up. Simmons could see them regrouping, organizing for another push. They had numbers, they had heavy weapons, and they clearly had a specific objective. This wasn't a random attack, but a planned operation. A young specialist appeared at her shoulder, someone she recognized from serving him scrambled eggs every morning. "Ma'am, we've got movement on the eastern wall. Looks like they're trying to flank." Simmons sprinted to the eastern side, confirmed the flanking movement. 10 to 15 fighters attempting to use the mortar damage as cover for an approach from an unexpected direction. "Get me 5 rifles on the eastern wall. They're trying to flank." She established position, began engaging the flanking element. Her HK-416 had started with a 30-round magazine. She'd burned through 2 magazines engaging the western assault, was on her third dealing with the eastern flankers. But those weren't random shots. They were precise eliminations of specific threats. A fighter with a radio coordinating movement, another with an RPG that could devastate the mess hall's defensive positions, a third who appeared to be an experienced leader directing younger fighters. The flanking attempt faltered, broke, pulled back to regroup. "Ma'am," the communications corporal was running toward her. "QRF reports they're 15 minutes out. Can we hold that long?" Simmons assessed the situation. Ammunition was getting low. They had wounded who needed medical evacuation. The enemy had probably already committed most of their force, which meant the next assault would be their maximum effort. "We'll hold. We don't have a choice." The next assault came from 2 directions simultaneously, western wall and the northern breach, coordinated to split the defenders' attention and create exploitation opportunities. The enemy had learned from their previous attempts, was now employing better tactics. Simmons had to make a decision. Split her attention covering both positions, or prioritize the greater threat. She chose the breach. If it was penetrated, the fight would collapse into close-quarters battle inside the mess hall where the defenders would lose their advantages. "Western wall! Pour fire into that assault element! Keep them suppressed!" She positioned herself at the northern breach, her HK-416 covering the approach. The enemy came at the opening with suppressive fire and momentum, trying to overwhelm the position through aggression. Simmons met aggression with precision. First fighter through the breach, double tap. Second fighter, headshot. Third, center mass. They kept coming, kept dying, and the breach became a choke point where tactical aggression met professional marksmanship and lost every exchange. Her HK-416 ran dry. She dropped the magazine, reloaded her last 30-round mag, continued engaging. 29 rounds left, 28, 27. "I need ammunition at the breach, now!" A corporal slid magazines across the floor. 5.56 millimeter rounds scavenged from M4 carbines that were compatible with her HK-416. Not her preferred ammunition, but ammunition nonetheless. She reloaded, continued fighting. Behind her, she could hear soldiers following her example. The motor pool staff sergeant was directing fire on the western wall with surprising competence. The captain had organized medical triage and was treating wounded while simultaneously coordinating defensive positions. The young specialist who'd alerted her to the flanking movement was now covering the eastern approach with methodical rifle fire that kept enemy fighters pinned. These weren't special operations warriors, but they were becoming something more than support personnel. They were soldiers defending their position, and under Simmons's leadership, they were discovering capabilities they hadn't known they possessed. A massive explosion rocked the southern wall, a section of the mess hall that had been relatively quiet until now. Simmons pivoted, saw a new threat developing. A technical vehicle, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, was maneuvering toward the compound, its crew-served weapon able to shred the mess hall's defensive positions if it achieved a good firing angle. "I've got the technical," Simmons shouted, sprinting toward the southern wall. She reached a firing position, assessed the moving target. The technical was 200 meters out, moving at approximately 40 kilometers per hour, driver and gunner visible in her optics. She led the target, compensated for movement and distance, and fired a controlled burst at the driver's position. The technical swerved violently as the driver was hit, veered off course, crashed into a concrete barrier. The gunner tried to bring the heavy machine gun to bear, but Simmons was already adjusting her aim. 3 rounds, center mass. The gunner collapsed across his weapon. The technical was neutralized, but its appearance indicated the enemy was committing reserve forces. They were desperate now, throwing everything at the compound in a last attempt to achieve their objective before reinforcements arrived. "Shadow 7, Viper QRF, we're 10 mics out. Situation?" "Viper QRF, we're still holding, but ammunition is critical. Enemy is committing reserves. We need you here fast." "Copy, Shadow 7. Coming in hot. Mark your position." Simmons grabbed another smoke grenade. "Marking position with purple smoke." She threw the canister through the broken southern wall. Purple smoke billowed into the afternoon air, creating a clear visual marker for incoming friendly forces. The enemy saw the smoke too, understood what it meant, made their final desperate push. A coordinated assault from 3 directions simultaneously, every remaining fighter committed to breaching the mess hall before the QRF arrived. Simmons made a split-second tactical decision. The northern breach was still the critical point. If it fell, everything fell. She sprinted back to that position, shouting orders as she ran. "Western wall, maintain fire. Eastern wall, watch for flankers. Southern position, cover my 6. Everyone else, feed ammunition forward and keep fighting." She reached the northern breach just as the main enemy assault hit. 15 to 20 fighters rushing the opening with suppressive fire and pure aggression, determined to overwhelm the position through numbers and momentum. Simmons's HK-416 spoke with controlled fury. She wasn't just shooting, she was managing the breach, eliminating threats in order of priority. The fighter with the RPG went down first. The one carrying what looked like explosives died second. The leader directing the assault fell third, but they kept coming. For every fighter she dropped, another appeared. Her magazine ran dry. She reloaded without looking, muscle memory taking over, her eyes never leaving the breach. The corporal who'd been supplying ammunition appeared beside her with an M4 carbine, adding his fire to hers. "Ma'am, I'm staying here. You taught us to fight. I'm fighting." More soldiers appeared, the young specialist from communications, a private from the maintenance section, a sergeant from administration who'd probably never fired his weapon outside of qualification ranges. All of them taking positions around the breach, all of them adding their fire to the defensive effort. The breach had become a wall of American firepower. Every enemy fighter who tried to enter met a storm of precisely aimed rounds from multiple defenders. Simmons coordinated their fire, calling out targets, ensuring overlapping fields of fire, transforming individual shooters into a coordinated defensive team. Left side, fighter with grenades, take him down. Right side, two coming together, engage both. Center, watch for the one in black, he's got explosives. Her commands were crisp, immediate, informed by years of combat experience that could read a tactical situation and identify threats before they materialized. The soldiers around her responded with growing confidence, their shooting improving under her direction, their fear transforming into focused aggression. A fighter made it within 5 meters of the breach, closer than anyone had gotten. He was fast, experienced, using covering fire from his team to close the distance. Simmons engaged him with a controlled burst, but he dove behind debris just outside the opening. She could see him preparing to throw something, grenade or explosive device. "Grenade threat at the breach! Everyone down!" She didn't go down. Instead, she stepped directly into the opening, exposed herself completely, and put 3 rounds into the fighter before he could complete the throw. The explosive device fell from his hands, detonated among his own fighters, and the blast wave threw Simmons backward into the mess hall. She hit the floor hard, ears ringing, vision blurred. The specialist was immediately there, pulling her back from the breach, checking for wounds. "Ma'am, are you hit?" Simmons shook her head, clearing the concussion effects, assessing damage. Nothing broken, minor lacerations from debris, combat effective. She grabbed her HK-416, got back to her feet. "I'm fine. Back on the breach. They'll try to exploit the confusion." But the explosion had devastated the enemy assault element. Bodies littered the approach to the breach. The survivors were pulling back, their momentum broken, their casualties mounting beyond sustainable levels. The enemy assault broke against that determined resistance. Too many casualties, too little progress, too many Americans refusing to quit. The fighters pulled back, regrouped, and in that moment of respite, Simmons heard the most beautiful sound of her military career. The distinctive rotor beat of Black Hawk helicopters inbound at speed. "QRF is here. Keep fighting. We're about to get reinforcements." The helicopters came in fast and aggressive. Door gunners opened fire on the retreating enemy positions, 7.62 millimeter machine guns raking the assault formations with devastating precision. Simmons could see the impacts, enemy fighters being cut down as they tried to retreat, vehicles being disabled, crew-served weapons being destroyed. The enemy formation disintegrated under that withering fire, fighters scattering in all directions, the organized assault collapsing into individual survival attempts. Some threw down their weapons and ran. Others tried to continue fighting and were eliminated by the helicopter door gunners who had superior angles and unlimited ammunition. Ground vehicles followed, Humvees and MRAPs loaded with infantry who dismounted and established a perimeter, their fresh troops and full ammunition loads shifting the tactical balance decisively. The QRF infantry moved through the compound with professional efficiency, clearing sectors, securing positions, pursuing fleeing enemy fighters. The QRF commander, a Major Simmons recognized from morning briefings she'd served coffee during, appeared at the mess hall entrance with a squad of infantry providing security. "Shadow 7, Staff Sergeant Simmons." "Here, sir." Simmons safed her HK-416, moved to meet him, her uniform covered in dust and debris, her face showing the strain of 37 minutes of continuous combat. The major stared at her, recognition dawning. "You're the mess hall worker. You've been serving me breakfast for 3 weeks." "Yes, sir. Also conducting classified counterintelligence operations, and as of 30 minutes ago, commanding the defense of this position against a coordinated enemy assault." The major looked past her at the defended mess hall, wounded being treated, soldiers manning defensive positions, spent brass casings covering the floor like carpet, enemy dead, visible through breaches in the walls, the smell of cordite and blood mixing with overturned food from lunch service. The northern breach showed evidence of the fierce fighting, bullet impacts, explosion damage, debris, and blood marking where the most desperate combat had occurred. How many enemy casualties? Approximately 40 KIA, unknown number wounded. We held the position against overwhelming numbers through superior tactics and soldiers who refused to quit. And your casualties? 14 wounded, 3 critical. 0 KIA. Every soldier who was alive when this started is still alive. The major's expression shifted from disbelief to professional respect. Staff Sergeant, that's extraordinary. Against those odds, with this force composition, that shouldn't have been possible. It was possible because these soldiers fought like warriors when someone gave them leadership and confidence. They deserve the credit, sir. I just provided direction. The QRF secured the compound, pursued retreating enemy forces, and established a defensive perimeter that pushed out 500 meters from the mess hall. Medical evacuation helicopters arrived for the wounded, both American and enemy fighters who'd survived their injuries. The mess hall, bullet-scarred, partially destroyed, filled with evidence of desperate combat, became a scene of controlled chaos as reinforcements took over the security posture. Simmons finally allowed herself to lower her HK-416, to breathe normally, to process what had just happened. 37 minutes from first mortar impact to QRF arrival, 37 minutes of continuous combat command and precision shooting. 37 minutes that had transformed mess hall staff into combat veterans and turned a potential massacre into a successful defensive action. The young private from Idaho, the one she'd served extra potatoes to, the one she'd dragged to cover and treated when the first mortar hit, approached her with his arm in a sling, bandages on his face, and gratitude in his eyes. Ma'am, I need to thank you for the medical treatment, for the leadership, for everything. You saved all our lives today. Simmons looked at him, at the other soldiers gathering around her, at the mess hall full of people who'd discovered that their kitchen staff included a Navy SEAL who'd been protecting them in ways they'd never known. We saved our lives. You fought. You held positions. You followed orders under fire. That's what made the defense succeed. The motor pool staff sergeant stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, we wouldn't have known what to do without you. You turned a panic into a defense. You gave us purpose and direction when we were about to die. That's leadership. Simmons wanted to deflect, to minimize, to redirect credit away from herself. But looking at these soldiers' faces, she understood they needed this recognition, needed to acknowledge what had happened and who had led them through it. Then let's acknowledge all of it, she said. Yes, I commanded the defense. Yes, I engaged priority targets, but you executed orders under fire. You supplied ammunition while rounds were impacting around you. You treated wounded while the battle was still raging. You held positions that professional soldiers would struggle to maintain. We survived because everyone did their job. That's what matters. The base commander arrived, the colonel who'd been furious about undisclosed operations on his base. His expression now mixed anger with grudging respect as he surveyed the defended position and the soldiers who'd held it. Staff Sergeant Simmons, we need to talk about a lot of things. Yes, sir. I'm prepared to provide full accountability for my actions and the operation that brought me to this base. The colonel looked at the mess hall full of soldiers who were alive because of her leadership, at the enemy dead being processed outside the compound, at the defensive positions that it held against overwhelming odds. We'll get to that. But first, good work, Staff Sergeant. Damn good work. The after-action report took 3 days to compile. Simmons had eliminated 14 enemy fighters personally with her HK-416, coordinated the defense that killed 23 more through organized fire from mess hall personnel, and held a position that conventional wisdom said should have been overrun in the first 5 minutes of assault. The mess hall soldiers, people who'd thought she was just kitchen staff serving them food, gave statements describing how a SEAL operator had transformed chaos into organized defense, how precision shooting and tactical leadership had turned a massacre into a successful defensive action. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, the supply sergeant who'd been compromising operations, was in military custody facing charges that would result in life imprisonment. The evidence Simmons had collected during her 3-week assignment was comprehensive enough that his defense attorney had already advised him to plead guilty in exchange for any consideration available. Naval Special Warfare Command sent Commander Sarah Chen to conduct the classified debriefing. They met in a secured room where Simmons could provide the full mission report without the compartmentalization that had governed the operation. "You were supposed to identify the leak, document evidence, and extract quietly," Chen said. "Instead, you commanded a defensive action against a platoon-sized enemy force using a mess hall full of support personnel as your tactical element." "The situation developed in ways I couldn't control, ma'am. When the attack came, I had 2 choices: maintain my cover and watch 200 soldiers get massacred, or reveal my identity and defend the position. I chose to defend. With a HK-416, you'd kept hidden under the serving counter for 3 weeks. I'm a SEAL, ma'am. I don't go anywhere unarmed. The rifle was field stripped and concealed as mess hall equipment. It passed every inspection because no one was looking for a special operations weapon system in the kitchen." Chen smiled slightly. "The base commander is furious that we ran an operation on his base without his knowledge. But he's alive to be furious, along with everyone else who was in that mess hall. That's what matters." Naval Special Warfare agrees. You're being awarded the Silver Star for your actions during the defense. The citation will be classified because the operation itself remains classified, but the commendation goes in your record. "And the counterintelligence mission?" "Successful. You identified the leak, documented his activities, secured evidence that will result in conviction, and prevented further compromise of operations. The fact that you also defended a compound under assault while maintaining your cover until the tactical situation required revealing it is considered exemplary performance under impossible circumstances." Simmons nodded. "What's next for me, ma'am?" "You return to your team. No more mess hall assignments unless you specifically request them, though I suspect you're done serving food for a while." "I don't know, ma'am. It was actually kind of peaceful until the mortars started." Chen laughed. "Staff Sergeant, you're a SEAL operator. Peace isn't really our specialty." 6 months later, Simmons was back with her SEAL team, conducting direct action missions that didn't involve serving food or pretending to be support personnel. But the story of the mess hall defense had spread through naval special warfare. The operator who'd been disguised as kitchen staff and had commanded a successful defense using whatever forces were available. The soldiers who'd fought beside her that day, the private from Idaho she'd served extra potatoes, the captain who'd initially questioned her authority, the corporal who'd scavenged ammunition while under fire, all of them carried the knowledge that the quiet woman who'd served them meals had been a Navy SEAL protecting them in ways they'd never known, until violence forced her to reveal her true purpose. The young private, recovered from his shrapnel wounds, wrote her a letter that arrived through official channels. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for saving my life twice that day. Once when you pulled me to cover and treated my wounds, and once when you defended the position while I was too wounded to fight. I also wanted to apologize for every time I complained about the food you served. I understand now that feeding us wasn't your real job, but you did it anyway, while also protecting us from threats we didn't know existed. That's what makes you a hero, not the fighting, but the fact that you did the job no one knew needed doing until the day it mattered most. Thank you for serving us, in every way that word means." Simmons kept the letter. Not because she needed validation or recognition, but because it reminded her why the mission had mattered. Counterintelligence work wasn't glamorous. It was serving food and listening to conversations and documenting evidence while pretending to be someone else. But when that unglamorous work prevented soldiers from dying in ambushes set up with compromised intelligence, it mattered as much as any direct action mission. The SEAL trident on her chest had been hidden beneath mess hall aprons for 3 weeks. but it had always been there, representing what she was regardless of whatever cover she wore or role she played. The enemy had learned that lesson the hard way when they had attacked during lunch service and discovered that kitchen staff included a SEAL operator who'd been prepared for exactly that possibility. Years later, when Simmons had retired from active duty and was teaching tactics to new SEAL candidates, she used the mess hall defense as a case study in adaptive leadership and making decisions under impossible circumstances. "You won't always have perfect tactical situations," she'd tell them. "Sometimes you'll be outnumbered, under-equipped, and defending positions with personnel who aren't special operations qualified. Your job isn't to surrender to those limitations, it's to work within them and find ways to succeed anyway." The mess hall defense succeeded because I used the assets available. I didn't have a SEAL team. I had support soldiers with basic rifle training. I didn't have optimal weapons. I had scavenged ammunition and whatever rifles were available. I didn't have prepared defensive positions. I had a building with broken walls and emergency lighting. But I had soldiers who were willing to fight if someone gave them direction and confidence. I had sufficient weapons to engage threats. I had defensive positions that could be improved through tactical positioning. And I had 20 minutes to hold until reinforcements arrived. So that's what we did. We held for 20 minutes, and everyone who was willing to fight lived to tell about it. One of the candidates asked the question Simmons had been expecting. "Ma'am, what was it like to reveal your identity after hiding it for 3 weeks? Didn't that compromise the operation?" It did compromise the counterintelligence mission, but that mission's purpose was protecting those soldiers from threats enabled by compromised intelligence. When a direct threat materialized, continuing to hide my identity would have meant failing the mission's actual purpose, keeping those people alive. So I made the call that saving lives was more important than maintaining operational security. Naval Special Warfare agreed with that assessment. But I won't pretend the decision was easy. Every time you break cover, you're ending an operation that took weeks or months to establish. You make that trade when the situation requires it, not casually. Another candidate asked, "The report says you eliminated 14 enemy fighters personally. How did you maintain fire discipline while also commanding the defense?" By understanding that precision shooting and tactical command served the same purpose, controlling the battlefield. When I was shooting, I was eliminating specific threats that could devastate our defensive positions. When I was commanding, I was positioning forces to maximize their effectiveness. Both activities contributed to the same goal. The key is knowing when to do which. If there's a critical threat that only you can eliminate, shoot. If there's a defensive position that needs to be organized, command. If you try to do both simultaneously, you'll do neither well. Prioritize what the situation requires in that moment. The students nodded, taking notes, trying to understand how someone could serve food for 3 weeks and then command a defensive action using mess hall personnel as tactical elements, trying to grasp the mindset that made those seemingly contradictory activities part of the same mission. Simmons understood their confusion. Most people saw operators as door kickers and direct action specialists. They didn't understand that sometimes the most important operations involved serving scrambled eggs while listening to conversations, building a case against an insider threat while pretending to scoop potatoes. Until the day violence forced the operator to step forward and demonstrate that the SEAL trident, hidden beneath a mess hall apron, was always there. Always ready, always representing capabilities that would emerge when circumstances required. The mess hall had been repaired, the dead buried, the wounded recovered. But the memory of that day remained, the moment when kitchen staff revealed themselves to be special operations warriors, when food service became fire superiority, when the woman serving lunch demonstrated what SEALs do when someone attacks their position. Staff Sergeant Noelle Simmons, the operator who served Chow until the enemy attacked and everyone saw her SEAL trident. The warrior who proved that sometimes the most lethal person in the compound is the one serving you mashed potatoes and listening to everything you say. She'd been just serving food in the mess hall until the enemy hit the compound. And then she'd been exactly what her SEAL trident indicated, a naval special warfare operator who'd been prepared for violence from the moment she'd arrived disguised as support staff. The enemy learned. The hard way. The permanent way. Because SEALs don't stop being SEALs just because they're wearing aprons and serving food. They just wait for the moment when the apron comes off, the rifle comes out, and everyone discovers what was always there beneath the disguise. Every single time. The legend of the mess hall defense became required reading at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Not because of the combat statistics, though 14 enemy KIA and 0 friendly deaths spoke volumes, but because of what it represented about adaptability and mission execution under impossible constraints. Simmons had been given an assignment that required her to be invisible, to blend in, to observe without being observed. For 3 weeks she'd succeeded perfectly, gathering intelligence while serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner to 200 oblivious soldiers. Then, circumstances changed. The mission parameters shifted from intelligence gathering to force protection in the span of 3 seconds between mortar impacts, and Simmons had adapted immediately, transitioning from invisible observer to visible commander without hesitation. That adaptability, that ability to recognize when the mission had changed and to execute the new mission with the same professionalism as the original, defined what made special operations warriors different from conventional soldiers. The HK-416 that had been hidden beneath the serving counter for 3 weeks hadn't changed. Simmons's capabilities hadn't changed. Her training, her experience, her commitment to protecting American lives, none of that had changed. What changed was visibility. The SEAL trident that had been hidden became visible. The operator who'd been disguised revealed herself. The warrior who'd been serving food started eliminating threats. And 37 minutes later, when the QRF arrived and the battle was won, everyone understood what had always been true. The most dangerous person in the compound had been the one serving mashed potatoes and listening to everything you said. Staff Sergeant Noelle Simmons, the mess hall SEAL, the invisible warrior who became visible exactly when it mattered most. The enemy never saw her coming. That was the point. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of brave women in uniform.